Today's sermon text is from Luke chapter 8. We're continuing through the Gospel of Luke. And every once in a while, it's easy. You get a good text. And then every once in a while, you're like, man, do I have to read that? This is one of those ones that's so odd. I remember when I first got here, I was in that building at a Bible study for our teenagers. We were with a bunch of middle schoolers. And we were reading this very story. And I asked them, guys, do you think that really happened? And they go, well, duh, no, that's impossible. I mean, that's how weird this story is. And so as I read it, I encourage you to wonder what your questions would be and what you have. And hopefully by the time we're done, we answer maybe a few of those questions you might have. So this is from Luke chapter 8, and it goes like this. The disciples sailed to the region of the Gerasenes, which is across the lake from Galilee. When Jesus stepped ashore, he was met by a demon-possessed man from the town. For a long time, this man had not worn clothes or lived in a house, but had lived in the tombs. I always think of my son Theo at this point. The dude hasn't bathed in like a month. When he saw Jesus, he cried out and fell at his feet, shouting at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, don't torture me." For Jesus had commanded the impure spirit to come out of the man. Many times it had seized him. And though he was chained hand and foot and kept under guard, he had broken his chains and had been driven by the demon into solitary places. Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "Legion," he replied, because many demons had gone into him. And they begged Jesus repeatedly not to order them to go into the abyss. A large herd of pigs was feeding on the hillside. The demons begged Jesus to let them go into the pigs, and he gave them permission. When the demons came out of the man, they went into the pigs, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and was drowned. When those tending the pigs saw what had happened, they ran off and reported this in the town and countryside. And the people went out to see what had happened. When they came to Jesus, they found the man from whom the demons had gone out, sitting at Jesus' feet, dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who had seen it told the people how the demon-possessed man had been cured. And then all the people of the region of the Gerasenes asked Jesus to leave them because they were overcome with fear. So he got in a boat and left. The man from whom the demons had gone out begged to go with him. But Jesus sent him away, saying, "Return home and tell how much God has done for you." So the man went away and told all over town how much Jesus had done for him. Now, true story. I am like one of those junior hires. When I hear a story like this, I'm like, what in the world is going on? And I guarantee you, there was like 10 rabbit trails we could go down. Like, what do you mean they went into pigs? You know what I mean? There's a lot of rabbit trails we can go down, but there's three main things that I want to help you see today from this story, which is, I think, why all three writers of Mark, Luke, and Matthew included it. And it's this, is that whatever evil is, Jesus is in charge of it. That Jesus can bring transformation and healing to even the unimaginable. And lastly, that God sends healed people out to heal other people. So that's where we're going a little bit today. But I gotta be honest with you, stories like this are hard for me. Because, I grew up as a pastor in North America, and not once since I've been here at Liberty has anyone ever emailed me and said, "Hey, Chris, what are you doing Tuesday? I think we need an exorcism." No one, right? Those are movies that you see on Netflix. But my day-to-day life here at Liberty includes almost no casting out of demons or spiritual, laying on, just all that whole world isn't something that normally happens here. And when I was growing up, that wasn't a part of my story either. But I will tell you this, that even though that's probably not as normal here at this church, man, things got weird for me when I was a pastor in Miami, Florida for a while. So down there, it's a Caribbean culture, and there's a lot of other world religions, especially voodoo religions and that kind of stuff. I remember one day I was driving into church, and there were police cars in the back of the parking lot, and I go, "Oh, what's going on?" And usually I'm never concerned because there's police cars at that church all the time. It was that kind of place. It was urban and highly dense and chaotic. And so we even had full-time security guards there. That's how different it was. But there were police cars, and I go to our property guy, and I go, "Hey, what's going on back there?" He's like, "You're not going to believe it, but it's the chickens again." And I'm like, "What? What are you talking about?" Well, what happens is they folks in that world who were a part of a voodoo religion, which was common in Haitian culture and others, would sacrifice chickens and cut their heads off and put them in bags, and they would float onto the banks of where our church was. And so we had to call the police because you had to make sure it was not anything else in bed. Just a normal day for a pastor, right? And I remember this was like in my first or second year. I'm like, what in the world is going on here? There have been no dead chicken heads at Liberty so far, and I love it. This place is wonderful. It's been great. But that's just a silly story. There were other far more serious stories. I can remember one time where someone came to me and they said, hey, we'd like you to come to our house to clear out the evil spirits that are there. And I'm like, pretending like I'm a pastor. Oh yeah, sure. In all of my training in getting a PhD in systematic theology from an Ivy League school, I didn't have one class on spiritual cleaning out of houses. Not even one. And so I'm pretending, I'm like, okay, let's do it. And so I go, and apparently someone had died in that house before they bought it. They bought the house, and then they needed a pastor to come to kind of like spiritually clean it out. So I didn't know what to do, but what would you do in a situation like that? So what I did is I'm like, well, all right, here's what we're going to do. We opened up all the doors, and we opened up all the windows, and we kind of walked into every room, and we go, Lord, would your goodness and your love blow all of the evil out and bring all of the goodness in? And we would walk to the next room. And by the time I was done, she was happy, and they were happy, and I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. But I don't know, it was like a new world for me because truthfully, most of my days are administration and email and working with boards and running staff meetings and preaching on Sundays and doing normal stuff. This wasn't something that I really understood or knew how to work with. It wasn't something I grew up with. But I'll just give you two examples of things that have kind of opened my world on this front. One is I was on a mission trip down in Haiti. And we were, Haiti is a tough place. It's a really tough place. Christianity has virtually no presence there. And it's just a very different culture. And I remember one time we were there and we were supporting some orphanages and traveling around. And one night we had to stay the night in this one city. And it was, the city was famous and very well known for being one of the centers of a tribalistic voodoo religion that was there. And there was masks and all kinds of things. I just remember the whole time I was there, from the time I entered that town till the time I left, I couldn't sleep and just felt really, really scared and just off. I don't know if you've ever had an experience like that. There was just something deep in my bones that just didn't feel right about that place. And I had never had that experience before, really. And I remember walking away from it being like, Lord, I am so thankful that where I live and where I spend my time, I don't have that darkness. It was like this darkness that just covered the place. And I walked around that town just kind of looking in shops, and it was a small town in the middle of nowhere, but I walked away from it thinking to myself, maybe there are dark forces out there, and how does all this work? A few weeks ago here at church, I can give many examples of this, but one example was there was a story that someone told me here where they knew someone whose kids had been attacked by dogs just here in Columbus. It was all over the news. And those kids are still probably not ever going to be able to be okay. And I just think to myself, does evil really exist? How does it exist? How do all of these things work? Those are really deep and important questions to ask. And it's really easy to just go to church your whole life and stay very surface level where you never ask questions about the spiritual life and spiritual forces and how all that works. And truthfully, we're a lot like those teenagers in the other room where when you hear stories like this, you just kind of blow it off and then we're like, let's get back to building walls. Right? That's kind of how we operate. C.S. Lewis, who's one of my favorite authors, he says that when it comes to all these spiritual things, and he was a great writer on this topic, one of the things that he says is there's two big errors that you can make about spiritual stuff. And you can go down either path, and these are the paths. One error is to think that they don't exist. And a lot of us go through our lives as if spiritual forces don't exist, and it's just me. When someone gets healed, my gut response is usually, oh man, that must have been good medicine. I never really think to myself first that there's spiritual forces at work in the world and that that's as real or more real than anything I can see. So he would say that if you're one of those people that never thinks about spiritual life, never thinks about demons and angels and God and all those things, my encouragement would be to you, go spend 10 minutes alone with your own heart and your own thoughts. And don't talk to anyone and just be still and silent. And what you'll notice, if you're brave enough to be quiet for even just a minute, you'll notice there's a lot more going on in your head and heart than you even want to deal with. That could be the spiritual forces at work in your own life. So error one is to deny that they exist. But error two is just as serious, which is to acknowledge their reality and be terrified by them. I remember when I was a teenager, I went and saw a scary movie called Final Destination. It was like one of those dumb things. I think they've made like 8 versions of it at this point. But I remember I was a teenager. I didn't know Jesus yet. Thankfully, a bunch of Young Life people found me and poured love into me, and so I found Jesus at one point. But I remember I was not a Christian yet, and it was all about this Satan guy that would like show up and try and take your life kind of thing, and I was just a young kid. I remember leaving that movie theater so terrified because that just brought up a lot of questions like, how does all this work? And I was actually scared of like what could be out there and what's out there and how does all that work? And I've met people that are grown adults that still live this way, that think like, man, there's no hope for me. Everything's dark. I'll never kick this habit or this sin that's in my life. Or they're just terrified that maybe spiritual forces are going to make, I don't even know. But he says there's 2 routes you can go. You can go that they aren't even real, and the other route is to think that they're all powerful and in control of you. And in this story, we meet a God who comes with a totally different approach. How does he do it? He meets a man who has been out in these like tombs running around doing everything scary and terrifying, especially from a Jewish perspective. You know, like I joke sometimes, I'm like, Theodore, did you bathe in the month of April? Like, what's going on, brother? And I'll see him, like my daughter, she like does a spa bath every night with candles and music. And my son, he like tears off his clothes. He had baseball pictures yesterday. And like, do we have a clean outfit anywhere in the house, Jen? Anywhere that we can get him into. Like, he's just that crazy one. Times that by 1,000. This guy had, I don't even know how to describe it, but it describes him as being full of a demon. And it wasn't just any demon. The word there is legion. And legion is like representing like the Roman command. It was a powerful force in Roman armies, usually thousands of soldiers well organized. So this wasn't just any demon. It was like all the power of the demons had come together to take over this person. And I am not going to go down the rabbit trail trying to figure out the connection between mental health, spiritual forces, and all those things. I'll be honest, I think that remains a mystery to us even to this day, and that's very hard to understand. Even in my own family, there's been folks with mental health, and it's a mystery. But I do know this. When Jesus met a man once who was full of all of the problems you can imagine, running around with no clothes on, yelling and screaming at the top of his lungs, a danger to everyone. And on top of this, he was in Gentile territory. It says that they went to the area of the Gerasenes, which means Jesus was wandering into non-Jewish territory. That's like going down to the bad neighborhoods of Columbus or something like that. And then on top of that, it was in a graveyard. And if you're a Jewish person, you can't be anywhere around death. You become unclean. So this was an unclean place with Gentiles, an unclean place in a territory, in a cemetery that you weren't supposed to be in the first place. And of course, there were pigs nearby. Do Jews eat pork? Like, this was the wrong place for Jesus to be. And so Jesus gets in a boat, and he takes people, and the whole time his disciples are like, this feels like that place in Haiti, Jesus. Can we turn around? We do not belong here. We don't want to be here. One of the things that's amazing about Jesus is the one place that he shouldn't go to, where it seemed like evil had the strongest stronghold, where over this man's life, something dark and twisted and terrible had taken so deep a root that there was no hope left for him. And the locals had resorted to just chaining him up. I imagine they probably walked by once a week and just threw food on the ground and ran away. No one wanted to be around this guy. He was terrifying, scary, and Jesus puts in his GPS coordinates for this guy. And he doesn't hold back, and when he gets there, what does he say? He doesn't run away. I know that if I saw this guy coming at me with like chains and all terrifying, I would be like, out of there so fast. But Jesus looks at evil, and he says what? Get out of him. And how do the demons respond? You know, in other world religions, there's like a yin and yang thing where evil and good kind of wrestle back and forth. But in Christianity, what's unique about it is it acknowledges the reality of evil, even though it's a mystery sometimes. But it clearly says that whatever evil is, Jesus is in control and in charge of it. And he looks straight at this demon and says, get out of him. And what happens next? The demon is terrified of Jesus. It's terrified of Jesus. Everyone else has been terrified of the demon, but who is the demon afraid of? What I find fascinating is that the demon begs for his own life from Jesus. Jesus actually shows mercy to evil there. They beg not to be thrown into the abyss, whatever that means. It's different in each of the Gospels. But they beg to be thrown into the pigs. And that's another, just go on YouTube, have some fun. I have no idea how to answer some of these questions. I read commentaries this week, and there's a lot you can dive into. But here's what we know, is they beg for help, and Jesus even is gracious to the demons. That's astounding thought. And then what happens is he casts them out. And one of the things that you learn from this story head on is that whatever evil is, Jesus is in control. Why Jesus doesn't fix everything right away is a mystery to me. It's always been a mystery. We'll talk about that in a second. But the key thing that was astounding to the disciples was in Luke chapter 8, if you go back and read it, there's a few stories in there. What they're starting to understand as we read the Gospel of Luke is that this Jesus guy was both more powerful than they could ever imagine, and that created a lot of fear in people. The story right before this was Jesus calms the storm. And they're like, whoa, Jesus has power over nature? What kind of person does that? Because they'd met magicians. They knew people that had like spiritual tricks. That wasn't uncommon in Jesus' day. But Jesus walks in and he can calm storms. I wish I could have done that for Wallsbill yesterday, but I couldn't. But I know this, that if someone walked up to me yesterday in the middle of that storm and said, hey, Chris, don't worry, I got this. And they raised their hand and the clouds go away, I would have been like, get out of here. I mean, I kind of would have liked it, but at the same time, I would have been freaked out. And then imagine the next day, there's someone that comes up here to church who hasn't been able to walk maybe for like their entire life. And if I walked over to them and put my hand on them and said, hey, in the name of Jesus, I tell you to get up and walk, and the person walks, I'm not going to lie, at first we'd be like, wow. And then we'd be like, that's weird. Is this a safe place? Is this a normal place? What can happen here? Anytime we start talking about these things, you have one of the two reactions that these people had. Some of them said, Jesus, get out of town. And the other person said, I want to follow you. So the first thing we learn from this text is that Jesus is in control of evil. The second thing that we learn is that transformation is truly, truly possible. This was someone that everyone in town had given up on. Have you ever given up on someone? I've given up on people before. Oh, there's no hope for you. Or I've put a lot of energy into you, but I'm not going to waste my time anymore. And Jesus was unique in his ability to bring hope into even the darkest places. One of my favorite things about being a pastor is not Sunday morning, although I love Sundays, don't get me wrong. It's actually the ministries that happen here on Sunday nights in basements, and that happen on Tuesdays at random times in the little corners of the building called recovery groups. And recovery groups are places where folks around our church and in our community have said, hey, I feel like there's some evil in my life and some dark stuff that I can't fix. And I need help, and I need healing, and I need transformation. I even got to have coffee with one of those leaders this week and getting to hear the stories of the people that have been seeking healing and transformation in their lives. It happens, and it's beautiful, and it's incredible. But I'll tell you this. Do you know what those early steps are for transformation in any recovery group? The first step is this, is admitting that there's like a power that you can't control. So the first step, anyone that wants recovery, do you know it? They actually have to walk in and be like, I've got a problem and I can't fix it. 9 times out of 10 when I have a problem, my strategy is like there's an app for that, right? Like I try to figure out like what self-help book or what trick I can use to fix my problems. But it turns out that in order to solve the deepest problems of your life, you can't do it. You want to be more loving? You want to break an addiction? You want to find hope? You want to actually find your purpose in life? Turns out you're not going to find it by looking inward, but by looking up and out. So that's why that first step is actually to admit that you can't do it. And do you know the second step? Is to ask that there's a higher power that can help you. And a lot of those recovery groups are people that don't go to church often because they don't want to go to church because they know that if they have a problem, they're afraid to go to church because that's where they'll be judged. That's why they call it anonymous, right? Man, if only church, you guys, could be a place where people that are actually needing help and transformation could find it on Sunday and not on Monday night. But here was a person who was desperate. Can you imagine how many times this person sitting in a graveyard having food thrown at him in chains had begged for help and never found it? And one day this little guy named Jesus walks up and says, "Get out of him." And they left. And his prayers were answered. And I don't know why people don't get healed all the time, and I don't know how it all works, but I do know this. The deepest desire of my heart, and I imagine the deepest desire of yours, is that the demons in your life would go away, and that Jesus would come in, and that you could have peace. And that there's this story, the way it ends, is that all the people are in shock because the demons leave, and the guy's healed, and they're wondering what's going on, because it's like my Theodore, when he has a bath, everything changes. He's clean, and he comes downstairs, and he's dressed properly, and I'm like, what is happening, child? Are you okay? And this guy that everyone had known as the crazy guy in the cemetery was sitting at Jesus' feet in his right mind, taking notes and listening and participating and able to get in a conversation, and everyone's like, what's going on? And the townspeople see this healing, and how do they respond? This is the third point. Is that Jesus sends people out on mission. Not only does he have power over death and evil, but he also transforms and heals people. But the third thing that he does is he sends people. Because what he does with this guy is he heals him, and he's sitting there all normal, and all the townspeople are like, Jesus, I'm going to be honest with you. It's been nice having you in town for a little while. But if you have this kind of power, that makes us nervous. Because how can we have any power if you have it? And trust me, one of the hardest parts about being a Jesus follower, in a disciple, is letting go of your power and control and handing it over to him. Just like everyone in recovery does when they ask for someone to help them. And they said, we'd rather keep things the way they are. And in fact, truth be told, you killed our pig industry. Because following Jesus often means bringing dramatic changes to your business and how you do life and where you live and all those details. And they were like, you know what, we'd rather just keep things the same than follow you, Jesus. So could you get back in that boat and go home? You could personally observe a healing by Jesus, changing someone's life dramatically, and your response could be, I'm not comfortable with that. That's one of the reasons, to be honest, why pastors and everyone who's a Christian today, we always want people to be healed, but Jesus knows us better than that. He knows that if we just healed people all the time, it doesn't mean you'd be any closer to faith if you saw a healing than if you didn't. But this man gets healed, and he sits down at Jesus' feet. And I love the way the text ends. It says, the man from whom the demons had gone out begged to go with Jesus. Because if you get one taste of Jesus, what do you want? You want more. Anytime you experience that love and that grace and that forgiveness and that joy, man, it's addictive. I'm not going to lie. And he goes, Jesus, can I follow you? But Jesus did this. He sent him away saying, return home and tell how much God has done for you. And so the man went away and told all over town how much Jesus had done for him. So at Liberty, one of the things that's kind of cool is there's a gentleman here who put these signs out that when you leave church, it actually says you're now entering the mission field, right? And so one of the ways I think about church is you're either in one of two categories this morning. You're either in the category of someone that's been healed, or you're in the category of someone that's needing healing. Those are the only two categories of people here. And if you're in the category of been healed, your job when you leave church today is to go tell people how good Jesus is. And that doesn't mean like now you just share like weird memes on Facebook about Jesus. Each of you has probably a family or a business or a neighborhood or a workplace or somewhere where Jesus is nudging you to share love. I don't know where that is, and I don't even know how that is. One of my best parts about being a pastor is my job isn't to tell you how to do it. God will lead you if you're open to it. And so I invite you to be like this person who was healed, who when you go home today, just kind of open your hands up silently in prayer and just be like, Jesus, I don't know how and I don't know where, but I know today you want me to point toward you somehow. Will you help me see how to do it? My experience has been he usually shows you. And if you're that person in need of healing today, who has a broken relationship in their life that they don't know how to fix, or an addiction that you just can't break that's destroying your life, or you haven't found your place in life, or I don't know what it is, or maybe you're being bullied at school, or at work, or somewhere, wherever that is, just know that just like you're wandering around in that place that feels like no one sees you, Jesus will get on a boat and come find you. And that all healing is possible. And I don't know why and I don't know how it happens the way that it does, but if you're in need of healing, the best thing that you can do is admit that you can't fix it and to ask God to help you. And that's usually the beginning of transformation in your life. And so stories like this, I'll be honest, I'm just like those teenagers that were over there that were like, I don't understand how this could happen. I don't either. But I also know, when I'm honest with myself, I find myself having way more in common with that guy in the graveyard that day than I do with the guys that have everything put together when I'm honest with myself. And I'm in just as much need of the power of Jesus in my life as he was. So if you need that power today, if you need that healing, will you bow your heads and pray with me? God, we're a spiritual people. And sometimes we forget that there's good and evil and all these things are at play in our lives. And sometimes we don't even have the courage or time to acknowledge that reality. But today we come before you and we say, would you please help us? Would you open our hearts and open our minds to hear what you have to say? And would you cast them out when we ask you to do so, when we pray this in Jesus' name? Amen.